Virgin. Beauty. Bitch. Podcast. Inspiring women to overcome social stereotypes and share unique life experiences without fear of being defiantly different. Your hosts, Christopher and Heather. Let's talk, shall we?
I love the metaphor of the swinging pendulum and how it often works to describe social change. Consider this. For how many millennia have men wielded social, economic, and political power while women have had to fight for an identity that acknowledged them legally as human beings? Fight to earn the right to vote. Fight to secure personal liberty, sexual liberation, and professional equality. But lately, the pendulum swing has been sped up, being forcibly pushed away from male-dominant positions towards the opposite polarity, female domination. The preferred vehicle for this movement is, of course, media. It's been books, it's popular music lyrics, but lately, the movement has taken over television and film. And few people understand this conscious shift from, more than YouTube entertainment critic and commentator known by her pseudonym, Baggage Claim. Baggage Claim, I love it. BC, welcome to Virgin Beauty Bitch.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Christopher. Thanks, Heather. Thanks for having me.
We are pumped to have you and your knowledge on this. So, people, they want to be entertained. They want their emotions evoked, their imaginations challenged, but there's something sinister mixed into the message. You did a YouTube video a short while ago titled Everything Wrong with Woke Feminism. First off, for the people who just want to pay their money and sit in the seats, what is woke feminism?
So I think the big difference between what I would call legitimate and necessary feminism versus woke feminism, which it can sound as if I'm derogatory towards the whole feminist movement, and I'm not. Naturally, I'm very grateful for the suffragettes and the women that have come before me that have paved the path for the level of equality that we all enjoy today. And that's sort of the line that I would draw, is that genuine feminism has been out to help women achieve that sort of equal status in society. And woke feminism is really out for female domination and has had that undertone of revenge against men, and also has taken a very black and white perspective on history, because the trends of history are very interesting, because I would say that most people have not enjoyed rights and comforts throughout history, including men, including people of color, including everybody. It's been always a select few people that have been sat at the top and had this hierarchy, which is why if you see even the evolution of governments have gone from monarchical, a lot of power in very few hands, to now more and more democracies and republics are more and more common today. So I think that's the evolution of civilization, is that power to some, privilege to some, to now privilege to many. And I think feminism played an important role in making sure that females were also part of that conversation. And there was a lot of technology that has helped sort of free us from the home, so to speak, because had it not been for feminine hygiene products, had it not been for, the pill and a lot of, machinery added to the home to kind of alleviate our duties, we could actually now start to look beyond the home and not be sort of relegated in that environment. And then, as you say, Chris, that transition from a search for equality to now let's try to prove to the world that women are actually superior. And that's something that I'm very, very anti. I wholeheartedly believe in the sacred bond between men and women and the sacred partnership that is necessary between men and women in order to not just have happy men, but also happy women and happy children and a happy society. I think all of that exists when men and women work together, recognize each other's unique traits, and join forces to win out in the end. And I think woke feminism absolutely does not want that. Feminism wants men kneeling on the floor, sort of answering in docile, in a docile state, held captive at the hands of a very empowered female that woke feminism wants us to believe is the new ideal woman, who has all the traits of being a man. She's stoic, she's unemotional, she has no care in the world. She doesn't even have a heart. She doesn't even have any attachment to any man. She is just this individual lone wolf. If she spares that, if she's not a lone wolf, then it's only for the sake of being with other women. She partners up with other women, but other than that, stands alone. And that's the new female introduction into a lot of Marvel films and a lot of Disney films, is that's the sort of trope you see copy pasted all over the place. And I think that's very destructive.
Can you give us an example that people would know and then identify with exactly what it is you're talking about?
Sure.
Just a concrete example.
Sure. The biggest example of that really was Captain Marvel. And, that movie came out in 2019. And Brie Larson played Captain Marvel, and that was that first injection of wokeness starting to make its waves into Disney and Marvel films. And as a character, Carol Danvers doesn't show emotion. Even though in that first movie, Captain Marvel, the whole reason, a lot of the plot is based on the fact that they call her emotional and they call her irrational, and that she has to overcome that. But at no point do you actually see her exhibit any of those things. And okay, there's nothing wrong with being emotional either. So I didn't like it from either side of that. But she's a good example of that. Even The Marvels, which was the sequel to that film, which came out back in October or November of 2023. She now partners up with two other women, and again, it's very similar. They're kind of copy paste of each other's character, showing very little to no emotion, and kind of inhabiting more masculine traits, I would say. Another example of this is Snow White, and Rachel Zegler is this young actress who got into a lot of trouble, a couple months ago for some of her comments that she had made at a red carpet. Months even earlier than that, she had said that this new Snow White is going to be not about love at all. It's not going to be about love. It's going to be about power. It's going to be about women taking on leadership roles. And I found that also very strange. That's one of the videos I had made where I found it very interesting that even the idea of love seemed very old-fashioned to her. And that's what's really interesting, is that it's this desire to rid women even of that desire to be in love, to be connected to a man. And instead she should aim for power, for leadership roles. And, there used to be a time where we used to say to people like, hey, there's something more important than your work. It's love. It's your home. It's your relationship. It's your time with your family. And now it's the polar opposite of that messaging, is that let's go after positions of power and forget the fact that Snow White, the original Snow White, the queen, is actually the one in power. It's a female empowered story in that sense, even though it's made in 1930s, but that's not something that they realize. And that the whole lesson out of Snow White is actually the queen is obsessed with kind of holding on to her power. She's obsessed with her youth and beauty and wants to destroy someone who's capable of loving. And that's actually exactly what Rachel Zegler has misunderstood. So I thought that was very interesting.
Do you find that part of the reason why the pendulum has swung so far this other way? Because when I see all these tropes and, such similar characters being portrayed again and again under the umbrella of, women empowerment, it feels to me that they're trying to almost go so far, like there was so long with women receiving one message about like what will bring them fulfillment, and that being a life of love and connection to a partner, and that like the family is the most important, and that has been such a common narrative for so long that now they're trying to counterbalance how long that's been a historical truism, if we'll call it that, I mean, ultimately going, that direction like all the way. But do you feel that that helps to be a counterbalance, or they've just taken it too far?
I think when you look at the counterbalance to that sort of messaging that women should be in the home and have singular responsibilities, I think the counterbalance was the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. And I think a lot of that got corrected by the 90s, where the new modern woman was someone who was working, and that was considered perfectly acceptable. I think it went beyond that point to now where we're at, primarily because of the rise of the internet, and specifically social media. What was great about that, there's that podcast, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. Unexpectedly, I got a lot of insights from that about sort of the rise of wokeness, if you want to call it that, which was all on Tumblr. Tumblr was really the breeding ground of a lot of things we're seeing out in open today. Tumblr was where a lot of them were burgeoning, let's say 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But Tumblr was a reaction to another site, which was 4chan. And 4chan was like, is the other side of the pendulum, which is a more sort of masculine, over-sexualization of women, sort of no holds barred on any sort of joke and how far it could go. And Tumblr was a response to that. And I think in the early 2000s, we saw a lot of the movies and the kind of humor that existed at that time, and then shows like Jackass, where it was an overextension of sort of the masculine, that anything goes type of humor. And now we're seeing the other side of the pendulum, which is, no, nothing is funny. You can never cross the line. So neither is good. I don't think either side is really good. And a lot of the people that I'm really close friends with who are creators on YouTube, they want to go back to that, that previous pendulum swing, where they want, no holds barred. You can make any sort of joke. And I'm not really that type of person. I'll stand for a joke. If I'm in the room and I hear an inappropriate joke, I won't say, hey, don't say that. I won't do that. But if an inappropriate joke is made about me, I'll say, don't do that. I 100% believe in those types of boundaries. I think we teach other people on how to treat us, and I think that's really important, especially as a woman. I think that's incredibly important. I think, but where we're at today is that, societally, we are in a no-limit society. Anything's possible. I can, if I want a burger, if I want to consume 5,000 calories, I don't even have to leave my home. I can get it delivered to my door. If I want to consume, never have a relationship with a man ever again, and just surround myself with as much porn as possible, that is entirely possible. We are in a time where there's no limit, and because we've really as a society said no to God more and more, and religion more and more, what religion does, it offers limits. It says, this is right, this is wrong. It offers limits on the human experience. And we kicked all of that off. Everything is about now breaking down barriers, no limits. We should be able to do anything. That's really the cultural, milieu that we're in right now. But the problem with that is that that's not actually good for humanity. I'm not saying that we should have all sorts of limitations. I disagree with that. I think we have to pick and choose, but humans need limitations. It's the same with if you look at children. If you raise children without any sort of rules or even a routine, the child is not happy. The child does not come out of that situation in a good mental state. You need some sort of limitations. You need to teach them rules and regulations. And that's one of the things that we're struggling with, is we're children now in an age with no rules, and we don't know what to do with that. And what wokeness is trying to do is they're trying to introduce new sets of rules. And they're actually closer to very puritanical ideas of you can't make this joke. If this joke, this joke is too inappropriate. And if you look back to older times where, men were looked at with a lot of seriousness about what kind of comments they made around women or how they related. Can you just go walk up to a woman and, slap her on the butt and tell her you want to wife her up or whatever nonsense you want to say to her, that was not acceptable in those times. It was actually, there was like a very high limitation on what kind of behavior men had to engage in when they were courting a woman. In fact, in the 1950s, you couldn't just, a teenage boy couldn't just spend alone time with a teenage girl. They needed a chaperone. There were a lot of limits. And I think during the sexual revolution, a lot of limits started getting lifted, and that exposed society to what unlimited male behavior could look like. And that's not a good thing. And that meant that a lot of ills started happening in society, and a lot of women started suffering because of that, because men started, let's say, abandoning children that they fathered or abandoning women that they kind of led on. And it started creating all these issues in society. And I'm not saying that's the only issue. It's just one example. But this is where we're at today, is that we don't know what to do because we've kind of opened up every possible limitation on our behavior, and we don't know what to do now, and we've sort of rejected any sort of guidance from religion.
That sounds like a Pandora's box scenario, right? I think that we are looking for guidance in limitations, but I think it's within us. It's about respect. It's about the freaking golden rule: do unto others. Hello. Like, it doesn't have to get more complicated than that. You don't need a Bible to have respect for other human beings. I think we've lost our balance in just governing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, self-governance is actually, I would agree, it's like at its weakest today, and that's the piece that's adding to it, is that how do people govern themselves, right? They need some sort of hierarchy in their mind, right? And this is why, human beings tend to do well in religion, is that the hierarchy in their mind, if they form it and say, God is above me, let's say, and then they say, if I do something bad, God's going to punish me. And that forces them to kind of think about that in private, when no one's looking, what are they going to do? And that aids in self-governance. But the problem is then sometimes people who are very religious can use that relationship with, let's say, their God, to then use it as a tool to dominate over others. Hey, I have this great relationship with God. You don't. You're inferior as a result. And they use it as a way to elevate themselves to almost godlike status when it comes to that person. So that, hey, I can punish you with my relationship with God. And that's the thing, is that the human mind is so tilted towards tyranny, or like oppression of others. Like, we can look at even, like, let's say something that's a spiritual relationship between you and God, we can inadvertently use that to dominate other people. But when you take out God, and I know it might sound like I'm arguing that society needs God. I'm not necessarily. I just see what happens when you take God out of the equation is that now we've replaced it with ourselves. If there's no God, there's a vacuum. You have to replace it with something. And what happened during the 90s was this push for sort of that follow your bliss type of, the self-esteem movement. And it became do what you want. Do whatever makes you happy. So what's at the top of the hierarchy on a personal state? It's you. So we've replaced God, so to speak. And now it's about whatever makes me feel good, right? So don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what's right for me. And the problem with that whole idea is that while it opens up the ways of letting people live and exist, it also takes away the opportunity to challenge people. And human beings need challenge. We need to hear whether or not, because not every idea that occurs to us is actually a good idea. Why shouldn't I consume 5,000 calories in the next hour? Why shouldn't I surround myself with as much adult content as possible versus actually engaging in a proper relationship? Engaging in proper relationships are hard. I have to compromise all the time. Why should I do that? An online relationship with some, faux AI or whatever is going to be the future, that doesn't take anything from me. I don't need to make a single compromise. I don't want to make a compromise. right? And so that's the problem, is that everything that occurs to us is not always right. We need the challenge. We need that pushback to try to figure out what's the right thing to do. And that's the reality of the world. Good ideas come out through challenge, not through acceptance. And so while the concept of unlimited acceptance sounds nice, and it sounds really, really nice, it actually doesn't result in anything good on an individual level.
Some of the things that you've mentioned really hit home around how people cultivate self-discipline as the parameters for them to live within, and that self-care is actually built off of self-discipline as one of the components. And I do agree that a lot of our society within woke culture has become about, it's almost a hedonistic, whatever brings you joy is something that you should use as your guiding star, rather than what does unlimited accessibility to the things that I like do to, you know, growing as a person or facing that challenge that's going to push me in a new direction. So, like, what comes to mind for me is for people who don't have religion in their life and have adopted, let's say, you know, Christopher's golden rule, which, you know, ultimately does apply within religion as well, right?
Yeah.
Treat others as
Okay.
you would wish to be treated, underneath the umbrella of that you're in a position to want to be treated well, because some people with enough trauma or whatever, you know, that isn't what you're seeking. So we'll just leave that one there. So, you know, for myself as a person who grew up in a religious family and a religious upbringing and did a lot of self-work to understand what my relationship is with my spirituality and like the discipline that's required for how I treat others and how I expect to be treated, that has become like my guiding light around you know, not kind of buying into you deserve to be happy all the time, that the point of this existence isn't to be happy all the time. The wide spectrum of our emotions is actually part of the beauty of being human. And so when I think about like where things have been in the past when it comes to some of, you know, my older gentlemen friends would say, and I'm sure that some women would say as well, that let's say in the 1950s, the expectation for men to truly take care of the woman that they marry, that they court her in a way that's respectful, that they're honoring her and her time and her body and her virtue, for lack of a better word, that was kind of built into like the religious foundations in many places across the world, but I'm just going to be referring to North America right now. I mean, underneath the surface of all of that, I still feel that a lot of that was because a woman didn't have the access to take care of herself. She didn't have the access to be able to have her own job, her own career, her own, you know, autonomy and agency to act on that autonomy. So ultimately, like the parameters that men had to work within is that women are so dependent on you to survive that to be an honorable man, you need to fit within these parameters. So even though there was this level of respect within that dynamic, ultimately, women were very much still at the whim of, is this guy going to remain a good guy? When I marry him, what if things start to go south and I don't have access to be able to get out of this situation?
Right.
And so I think like as a young woman growing up in a time where the Disney movie princesses were, you know, the OG, the OG, you know, finding your prince
Jasmine,
and all of
come
that
on.
was,
Yeah.
right? I love Jasmine.
Yeah.
She's my favorite. You know, what you said to me really, really hits a really important nerve, because when I think about what is the next step for women's empowerment, it is not becoming the masculine that we've seen in power positions. That's really throwing out like what is the essence of like the beauty of having women in powerful positions, let's go there, would be that they can bring their femininity and their compassion and their love and their collective aspirations to the table in places of influence. And so, you know, that's the type of portrayals that I want to see more of in Hollywood, rather than this stoic, masculinized, you know, she needs to get over being emotional sort of a thing. Because at the end of the day, emotions, as you said, as a weakness is still playing into, you know, feminized qualities being undermined or lesser valued. So we're getting repackaged what we've already been sold.
Yes.
I would just add into that, if you want to take and keep the parallel with the superhuman or superhero role of women, and juxtapose Captain Marvel with the first installment of Wonder Woman and that character development, you can find a woman who is powerful, still in her feminine space, through that arc of a character, as opposed to what it is Captain Marvel is. Am
Yes.
I right or am I off?
No, you're completely right. And in that, in one of the videos I'd made, I talked very highly of the Wonder Woman representation because, first of all, she is very feminine, and there's beauty in that, and where she's really attached to doing the right thing, and that's a very feminine idea. For women, you know, what you're saying, Heather, is that in the 1950s, there's this discrepancy of, you know, women being weaker and considered the weaker sex, right? And that was often said as like they're the fairer sex, right? So they're held in a different light than men. And at the end of the day, no matter how much encouragement you have from society for men to do the right thing, the women are still at their whims, right? But that's still a reality today for us, right? Women are always going to be weaker, no matter how much they try to convince us otherwise. And that's why a lot of the co-opting of sort of these superhero narratives is so important to woke feminists, because in that they don't have to pretend that. They don't have to pretend that women are weaker because they're superheroes. So a superhero can be the same strength as a male superhero, you know, because it's not answering to reality in that sense. And I think, you know, what's interesting, if we take things back to 1950s, there's such a realization that we have of the difference of like how women are treated today versus how they were treated in the 1950s, but we don't pay attention to that same idea about men, right? The men in that time were told that, you know, there's like the idea of what it meant to be a man was also a very strict idea of how much emotion they could show, what they could do, what they had to do, how they had to provide, how they had to like think about their mental health, how they had to think about their needs, their everything. And so like I don't think it's a man and woman thing. I think it was just the reality of life, is that there were very strict ideas of what it meant to be, to how to exist. And for men, historically, they have been treated as the more disposable class. You know, it's an interesting thing is that we don't think about the privilege of even like in 1912 when the Titanic sinks and the people that have access to the boats are the women and children. Why is that? If women are so looked down on and considered the weaker and like the infinitely inferior sex. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. Why were they the ones who had the right to leave, but the men did not? And yes, it went by class first, right? And class plays a really big role as well. Like the rules of courtship of how men should treat women applied to the upper classes, not necessarily the lower classes. So that's also a reality of life, is that a woman from a lower class was never treated as well as a woman from an upper class. So, but the thing is that a lot of societies that have existed have actually, using religion, fundamentally tried to instate the holiness of a woman and a child as that dyad, and said that that needs to be held to a higher standard. So that's the Madonna and child symbol, right? But even in Hinduism, the whole dyad of woman and child needs to be held above everything else. Is that the man must choose to give up his life to protect that, because that represents the future. And any society that has chosen not to do that, that has sacrificed the woman and the child, is a society that has not lasted. And so that's what I think we can look at that understanding as a way of how to move forward today, which is that women are independent. They're far more independent than ever in society, ever, right? And but that doesn't mean that holy trinity, if I can use that phrase in this, is not necessary, which is man, woman, and child. And I know I'm talking about heterosexual couples. I'm not trying to exclude the homosexual couples. We can replace the sexes there too. But that connection between two adults and a child, and keeping that the responsibility of the two adults is to keep the child safe, and the responsibility of the masculine is to keep the feminine and the child safe, and that the responsibility of the feminine is to play her role in that family. Now, does that mean a woman shouldn't work? No, that can mean a woman works. That means, like, the point is about partnership, and that both sides can seek to protect each other in their own way, in whatever feels appropriate, in whatever feels right, because there are so many variances on an individual level. But I think that part is still important, of encouraging both sides to look after each other.
But we don't respect that the way that it has been, nature has laid it out to us, that this is what is necessary for our survival long term and our mental health. But we have chosen to individualize, to be self-absorbed, as opposed to respecting this triad,
Yes.
as you say. Like you say, we have so much access to so many things. The family is not a necessary piece of our survival and moving forward, or so we have come to at least act. We're acting that way.
Yes. And that's been,
To our detriment, yeah.
yeah, massively to our detriment. Already, Western society is very much tilted to having a very weak family structure. This is something that's historically true since the Norman conquest. And, we are descendants of the British. Like, the American culture is a descendant. It's like a subset of the British culture. And so it's true throughout the West, Australia, Canada, America. The American family is a very weak concept. And in that sense, it can be a good thing, because then it can give the rise of individualism, which has been very helpful for America. But I come from India. I'm born and raised in India, and there the family structure is very strong. So
Yes.
what comes first is the family, then comes you. So on your wedding day, your parents will not come to you and say, "Hey, we just want you to be happy. This wedding is about you." They will not do that. They'll say, this wedding is about all of us. This is about the family. And if you're not happy, that's okay, because the family is more important, right? It's the family is at the top of the hierarchy. God and then family. So, so it's very interesting, because coming from that kind of culture to a culture that's very much like, "Hey, are you happy?" Like, is a very weird thing to then go home to my Indian parents and then negotiate with them accordingly. And they're like, "We don't care." So, so I think, what's worse, what's really worse for America than, after already having kind of a weak family structure of saying, "Okay, you're 18 years old, you go and make your own way out in the world," which to me sounded like such a strange concept, that, your family encourages you to go and just do your own thing after 18. But then growing up and realizing the value of that. But then beyond that, the high rate of divorce, massively high rate of divorce, massively high rate of fatherlessness, which is something I've been talking about lately, which is that in the stat of in 1950s, the fatherless rate was, 1 in 16 children had no father in the home. Right now, that number is 1 in 4. So it's devastating, right? It's a devastating impact. And the importance of fathers is being discussed more so now. But the biggest impact of that is that we know as a truism that it's very hard for a mother to leave her child, because she was literally physically connected with that child, And there are a lot of hormones, there's a lot of like maternal bonding that happens. Not something I've experienced, it's something I've been told. I'm not a mother yet. But for a father, it's a choice, so to speak. He has to decide whether or not he's going to stay or leave. And the impact of that on a child is that if a father abandons a child, there's this feeling of, why was I not good enough for you to stay? You know, I can understand why my mom is with me because it's biological. But if my father left me, that must mean I'm not good enough. And we see this a lot in the stories. You know, speaking of Chris, like you were talking about how, you know, all this is represented in media. You know, there's so many TV shows that show like the absolute feeling of abandonment that a grown man or a grown woman is going through because he or she never knew his or her father. You see it in New Girl, you see it in How I Met Your Mother, you see it, I mean, like, it's all over the place because it is such a big problem. And when there's always that storyline, and I think it comes from reality because writers are pulling from their own lives, where then at 30 or 28, the man or the girl is finally gets a chance to meet with the father, and there's so much anger. Why did you leave me? You know, why did you abandon me? And in a lot of the studies that they've done around homelessness is that homelessness or even drug abuse is so much related to, you know, where kids run away from homes. Like 90% of youths running away from homes and who are become then homeless run away from fatherless homes. And a lot of even drug abuse amongst youths is because is highly correlated to fatherless homes. And drugs fill a void that maybe your parents have left, right? And that's like a lot of the belief around drug abuse is that drugs become a crutch to cling to, where something is missing in your soul, right? Something's missing in your heart. And this last week I was speaking to someone after school, this great content creator, and he said, you know, they've done these studies on I think he was talking about heroin, that when you do heroin, it feels like getting a hug. Like what a statement on why people do that, right? On why people need it. And I live in a city where homelessness is such a big problem. I mean, it's a massive problem. And you know, and I look at these kids, and they're kids, and I say, well, you know, why did they think that they were not good enough for a better life than this, right? And it's like, you need two parents to love you and believe in you, to help you know that you deserve a better life than this. And I think that's massively missing for a lot of people.
Or if you are in a single parent situation where the one parent is basically has to abandon you every day to go to work, there's that void there as well.
Yeah. You know, it's just not possible to raise a child alone. I mean, so many people do it. So many women do it. It's a hard job. It's so hard. And it's impossible to keep up with children and then also be the breadwinner on top of that, you know, be the emotional crutch, be the financial crutch, and then also be the disciplinarian. I mean, those are all, there's such difficult roles to embody full time. You have to do all of that full time. I mean, that is a lot to ask of an individual. And I think the reason people don't criticize the state of single parenting is because they worry that it'll make that single parent feel bad, because at the end of the day, they're just doing their best job, right? And it's moms. It's usually moms. It's single. So nobody wants to put down the single mother, and that's never my intention. It's just that it's a really hard job to get right.
It's a
Something
hard
you
job
said
in a
earlier
family.
really struck home, because when it comes to this, you know, we're looking at divorce rates and we're looking at why people feel like, and I think a lot of this also goes into consumerism culture, that you can have what you need when you need it, and if it's not working out or it's broken, you can toss it and get a new model. And that kind of mentality is just so inbred into North American society that it's affected how we view relationships. But something that you said about that trinity and breaking it down to, you know, look at two parents and look at gender in a way that maybe is more accessible for people who are listening, you know, that deep feeling from both parents to want to find the ways to protect each other and that child in the ways that fit to, you know, your role within that family unit. I mean, there's something so precious about feeling that for this person that you care about, right? That you're responsible for them and they're responsible for you. Like that is really something sacred.
Yes.
On that, we love to ask our guests, what does feminine mean to you?
And I was gonna say actually, I've been married for about a year and a half, and I met my husband about 5 years ago, and I felt like I truly couldn't be feminine until I had the opportunity to be with a strong man. That being a woman and like having a job and just being out in the world, I've been living away from my family for a long time, so and I have an older brother and I have a father, I have a mother. I had to embody sort of the masculine and the feminine, project my power at work, make sure that I'm not being taken advantage of. I'm a very emotional person. I actually can cry almost at a drop of a hat. I get very emotionally invested in things that I'm listening to, whether it's watching a Lord of the Rings scene or looking at something really sad and like about puppies and kittens and so, but being at work, there are aspects of my emotional state that are not considered acceptable. And all of that, just trying to be as masculine as possible. And like trying to meet my own needs and keep myself safe and keep myself fed and keep my home together. And then I met this wonderful man who was willing to partner with me and look after me, and and it allowed me to actually just sort of be it's like and it's a joke that one of my girlfriends and I make, because she's also with this kind of similar type man. So when we go out, I don't think about anything. I don't think about where my keys are. I don't think about I don't think about anything. And I'm a very like on top of it type person. I just am. I know where everything is. I'm like that type. And I just like, it's like devil may care type. And he's paying attention to like, where's that car? Is that person gonna try to rob us? Is that like, he's like so on, like he's like military scanning, like the Terminator, like who's a threat? And I'm just like, whatever, like living my best life, like talking about random YouTube videos or whatever. And I thought about that. I was like, so much of the stresses I still feel in life, being as a single person, now suddenly went away because someone was willing to look after me. And it's the same, then it's completely changed in other situations where there are other times where I tell him, you don't have to worry about anything. I don't want you to sit and think about anything. You just sit and relax. You want to play video games? You want to watch something? You just sit and relax. I'm going to take care of everything. And that partnership of just letting someone just like let a load down of just like thinking and worrying and stressing all the time. And I think that then also just, I know I'm rambling a bit, but I'll get to your question. I swear I'll get to your question. But that being able to just feel loved and like have that opportunity to be de-stressed and not worry about who I am emotionally or all of that, that was just the beauty of being able to be in this type of relationship, that I never had that experience before. But what does being feminine to me is, and I know some people might not like this answer, I think to be truly feminine is to be extremely discretionary and to be very boundary oriented. And what I mean by that is that, the female body has the ability to either be really highly valued or extremely commodified. And that's one thing, that reality that a lot of feminists today don't want to accept. They want to believe that women can have sex like men, and that's just not true. That's just not true. Men think about sex very differently than women think about sex. And it's because of the biological implications of what it means for us to have sex versus for them to have sex. And I think what essentially means to be feminine is to draw extreme boundaries around who has access to you. who has access to talk to you a certain way, has access to your body in a certain way. And I think that's actually what creates a value in society for you as a person, but also for you in your mind. Like if anybody can say anything to you and treat you in any way and commodify you in any way, how do you feel then sitting by yourself about how much value you have for yourself, how much respect you have for yourself? So I think, and you can be an average woman, whoever, any kind of woman, and you could be on OnlyFans and sell your body. There's a market for it. And that's the strange thing about the female body, is that it's actually this really has this way of like, it can just be turned into this something sold online, right? Or even in person. So I think that reality of it means that it's something that you really need to protect for your sake and the sake of your relationships around you, and for your own health, mental health.
The sad thing is that Heather and I talk about this all the time, is that women do not take any value from feminine, because it has been discarded and disavowed by society as something of no value. So why should they attach themselves to aspire to something that is socially has no value?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. You go anywhere, and you just see the woman body, kind of splattered everywhere to sell anything. It's kind of like it's an load. Even on Instagram, I mean, pretty much, everything kind of pushed to you on the algorithm is some woman trying to convince you to give her attention in exchange for showing her body. And that's the thing, that's that easy route. And that's one of those truisms that used to be widely accepted, which is that nothing comes for free. You can take a photo of yourself of partly scantily clad, and you think that you're empowering yourself and you're getting attention for it or you're getting money for it. But that it doesn't come for free. There's always a price to be paid. And it's the things that take work that you have to hone, whether it's a craft you're honing, some story you've written, something you've put dedicated work into, and if you trade that for something, you will trade it for good things. But if it requires no work, all it requires is for you to let down your guard and let down your what you consider to be acceptable, there's a price. It just looks very different.
I think it's such a difficult dichotomy to live in for women, because I'm a big believer that a woman's sexuality created for herself and the understanding of what you said around boundaries. We've had one side of the pendulum being that sexuality for women especially, but also men, is sinful and wrong, and you should be ashamed of it and avoid it like the plague, especially before marriage. And then when you get married, it's supposed to flip a switch, and all of a sudden you're supposed to be fine and dandy with this person, even though you've been sold your whole life how dirty your body is, and the shedding of your lining, everything has been around that. Yeah. And then I feel that women have tried to denounce that in a way that they feel I think as an animal on this planet, that reproduction and what comes with it, or even just understanding your body and its capacities, is something that is exciting and can be, with the right parameters of boundaries, full of love and pleasure and things that are beneficial for our overall health, for our mental health. Yep. So, just hearing what you had to say there, I think that the fine line between these pendulums is because, ultimately when women think that sex is the same between them and men, it's ultimately leading down a path of accessibility with no bounds. Whereas I fundamentally believe that it's not a woman's body count or these other things that women have been shamed over. But for a woman to really give time and energy to think about what does her body and her sexuality mean to her, and what sort of sexual experiences does she want to have with herself, and what sort of sexual experiences does she want to have with a partner, and that real heavy thinking can lend to a healthy sexual life in a world that on both ends of those pendulums is very dangerous for women.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. There's this obsession with, you're right, with body count. And, a lot of these podcasts will have these OnlyFans models come on, and then, you know, OnlyFans models, they're just sort of engaging in this sort of in this transaction. They haven't thought a lot about these things. And then they'll bring on a cultural commentator who's obviously thought a lot about these things. And then they'll come on and dunk on these women and say, you're not a valuable woman. And I just find that whole mechanism of trying to it's a different version of saying, oh, God has told us that sex is sinful, right? It's a different version of that same thing, which is that you're relying on, you're just relying on this desire to put someone else down. You're just using some method to do that. The reality is, first of all, why isn't it good to be selling your sex, right? That should be explained on a very individual level. That should be explained on like what impact does it have on you, not you suck because you're engaging in this. And same with telling women that, oh yeah, everything about your sexuality is disgusting until you get married, then make sure you engage in it, right? It's unnuanced thought. And I think a lot of religious text, actually what's the power of religious text is that there are a lot of things that are, it's not like written literally, but it tends to be taken very literally. And that's why I like people who are analyzing text as more representative of the stories. Because critical thinking and like sort of very deep dive intellectual thinking is commonplace today, but not at the time that these texts were written. So people needed stories to give them an idea of what to do, how to think about things. But it wasn't, we can have this intellectual conversation, but they couldn't have written that into the Bible or even into Indian texts, right? The Bhagavad Gita, the Puranas, all these religious texts, they're all stories that are meant to be interpreted and applied to what we go through today. So I think as part of that, it's important to have discussions to kind of glean the right lessons out of it, but not use it as a hammer that doesn't kind of apply to modern life. So I think that's my take on it, is that sexuality should be encouraged, but again, people should be encouraged to treat it as not something to engage in just so openly. Because we talked about the impact on women if they're participating in, let's say, OnlyFans or adult industry, but we haven't talked about the impact on men, and that's huge as well. A man, and that's something that those podcasts don't talk about either. It's like a lot of the people watching those podcasts of OnlyFans models getting dunked on by whichever cultural critic. Those people watching are probably watching OnlyFans. They're probably looking up those girls later. They're participating in that trade as well. And that's not good for men. Men suffer massively from adult content addiction. It's a huge problem. And it's something that's, first of all, I don't think that there's a lot of tolerance for it. I don't think if someone came out and said to me on the street, like, hey, I have a porn addiction, I would be very kind about it. I would probably just feel a little bit disgust. And that's not a good thing. I think just like any sort of addiction, it should be received in a way that's with understanding. So I think there's a big sort of faux pas in even admitting that. And it's bad for it has impact on women too, women with adult content addiction, but it's really bad for men, and it specifically has impact on their hormones, on their sexual health, on their mental health, all of that. So in general, this whole trade is so bad for both sides, that it's something that I would argue like it should completely be made illegal. I would completely, 100% society would be far better if it was made illegal. But of course, that's not possible. That's
Yeah,
not a possible thing.
the ramifications of making things illegal, we can go back to alcohol and prohibition
True.
and how that went,
True,
right?
true, true. And
And
can, with the
speaking,
internet, can anything really be controlled? It can't.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But speaking of men, I know that you have just did a video, Why is Masculinity Under Attack? We want people to be able to consume your content. So give us a overview of what that is and how and where people go to find you and your work.
Sure, sure. So I wanted to make two sides of exploring masculinity and femininity both, and sort of how the trends from the last couple of decades have impacted how men are being represented in media and how women are being represented. And so in my masculinity video, I talk a lot about sort of the impact of woke feminists taking control of writer rooms, and how in their desire for revenge, they have really emasculated men and put them into, as lower ranks as is humanly possible, with a very poor interpretation of history, right, as we talked about earlier. And on the next video, it's talking about the impact that feminism has had on women, and what, Heather, you were saying, that you don't want that type of femininity that is basically a man in a woman's body. You don't want that either. And I think that's been the impact of feminism has pushed for, is that let's turn women into men. That's the only way to really be free, is for women there to be no distinguishment between the sexes. So that's something I dive into this next video. It's called, what's the title of it? Feminism Broke Society, which is it's a very provocative title. Hopefully, it invites people to come and watch. And the reason I'm making such a bold statement is because of a lot. I went back and read a lot of feminist text, and I have come to that conclusion that really that their desire is to blur the lines between the sexes. That's really the only way to move forward. And I vehemently disagree with that. So. Please take a look at those videos if you guys are interested in exploring topics like that. You can find me on YouTube. Just search Baggage Claim. And I also write a lot of Twitter threads addressing cultural issues. So if you ever want to find me on Twitter, I'm Baggage Claim 11. So look me up there.
I have to ask, where did the pseudonym come from? People need to know.
My friend helped me out with that because I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to write under a pseudonym, and I said, I want to make this channel about, individual empowerment, so to speak, that help people understand that how do you live a good life? How do you solve for all of your issues that you might be running into? Because I think there's also this, when we're young, there's this belief that life is really easy. But then, as you get older, you're like, wow, actually life is really, really hard. And, there's nothing reminiscent of like the childish perspective that you used to have. And I think a lot of trying to live a good, happy life means dealing with your own issues and taking responsibility for them. So my friend helped me conceptualize that. She said, what if you call it baggage claim? That you yourself are choosing to claim your baggage, you're choosing to claim all your issues that you need to grapple with in an avenue to better yourself. So I love that.
I'm glad I asked, because that is a very powerful message and underpinning of what you do. And I'm glad I didn't let that slip. That's very, very poignant.
And I'm glad she suggested it. She did a great job. She got it just right.
Right? We know all about names and what they can represent when you're going out into the world.
Speaking of which, I love the name of this podcast. I think it's so provocative and it's so accurate.
Thank you. Thank you very
you.
much.
It's been such a joy to have you. Honestly, it's been a tremendous conversation, and your insights are just it's really helped move even some of the things that I have held as, foundational, and I love conversations that will push me. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate that. And I can't believe I just gushed about my husband for I was like, where am I going with this? I just lost my mind for a second. Thank you for bearing with me through that.
No, I think it's an
Lovely.
important foundation for what you speak of, is this collaboration
Yeah.
and support for each other. I think it was a perfect example of what you've been speaking of.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you've been listening to
The Virgin
The Beauty.
and the Bitch.
Yes, find us, like us, share us. These provocative conversations happen every week. Next week, come on back. Bring your friends.